Wagwan, everybody. Welcome to the Dis Affamie History podcast, where we'll be speaking about history and as well family history and how history relates in terms of Caribbean people for the present as well as in the past, and how in the past what that does and brings forth for what we are going through at present and what we can learn from our history, from our family, and take that moving forward. So I do hope you enjoy the podcast. And if you like it, please ensure to subscribe, like, and review. Thank you.
Welcome to Dis Affamie History with your host, Wendy Aris. Today, we've got a fantastic episode lined up. Wendy will be sitting down with Mickey Garcia, who holds a PhD in Irish and British social history. A best-selling author, scriptwriter, educator, and energy healer, Mickey is driven by a deep curiosity about the world and a commitment to advocating for positive change. In this episode, they'll be diving into a topic that's both personal and powerful: the Caribbean Irish, how the slave myth was made. So settle in, and let's get into the conversation.
So I just wanted to thank you so much for Professor Garcia for coming on to the podcast, Dis Affamie History, and speaking about your book, Being Irish, How the Slave Myth Was Made. And before we start, can I just have you do a brief introduction of yourself?
Yes, thank you for having me today. I'm an independent historian and scriptwriter, and previously I worked as a journalist, and I write and publish mainly Irish diaspora and Irish immigrant-related books. My latest book has just been out, and it is called Campaigning for United Ireland. And so this book, The Caribbean Irish, was published a few years back in 2019, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. No, I happened to come across your book, and I noticed that there were some of my ancestors that were named in your book. So I just wanted to reach out to you
Is it?
to be able to discuss this. So looking forward to. So I'll start and just say, what was the central myth that the Caribbean Irish addresses, and why is it historically inaccurate?
So the myth comes from a confusion between indentured servitude and chattel slavery. Irish indentured servants were contractually bound to work for a few years, usually 4 to 7 years, in exchange for passage to the colonies and so on. And on the other hand, African slaves, were enslaved for life, as were their children, and they were considered property with no legal rights. So indentured servants had legal rights. They could own property after their term ended and were considered not property themselves. However, Africans were legally owned. Then there's a racial component. The racialization of Africans made their slavery perpetual and dehumanizing in a way Irish servants were not. And while many Irish indentured servants were poor and forcibly transported, especially after rebellions or as punishment, the system was not designed as a racialized lifelong bondage. So it was a labor system, not a racial sort of caste system. And the Irish slaves myth has been weaponized in recent years by white supremacist groups to downplay the horrors of African slavery and dismiss reparations arguments or suggest that everyone suffered equally.
Yes, and I mean, yes, they're just names, and yes, they're just titles, but there was a distinction. And how would you say this myth of Irish slaves in the Caribbean emerged, and what historical conditions allowed it to take hold?
So the myth emerged from a combination of historical confusion and political agendas, and also selective retellings of colonial history. In the 17th century, many Irish people were forcibly transported or migrated as indentured servants to the Caribbean, and they faced brutal conditions, but were not enslaved in the same way as Africans. And their backgrounds are so different because the distinction between indentured servitude and slavery was blurred. The myth was revived and spread online, often seeking to minimize the legacy of African slavery or reject racial justice efforts. And this took hold partly because it taps into genuine Irish suffering under British colonialism, making the myth emotionally resonant. And so Ireland has been described as a template or laboratory for the British Empire, which means that the British used Ireland as a model for the colonial policies and practices in other parts of the world. So the Irish diaspora is a bit like a massive database. That's why it can be used as a screening device to interpret a wide range of subjects such as race, ethnicity, class, gender, and social inequality.
Yeah, no, definitely. And what role did colonial records and, of course, media or political interest play in kind of constructing and maintaining this myth?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. We know how history can be shaped or distorted and reused. So colonial records contributed to the confusion by sometimes using ambiguous terms. For example, laborers can make it easier for later misinterpretations to take root. And I did research on Irish immigrants at many archives around the world. It is often hard to pinpoint Irish people as they were often classified as British or English. And when Ireland was colonized by England, they were English/British subjects. The south of Ireland is a republic and an independent country, but the north is still a part of the UK. And also, Irish people are not all poor or homogeneous. They're wealthy people, part of British colonizers, administrators, traders, and so on. So for the same reason, it is hard to separate Scottish or Welsh people from English people. It is not often straightforward to separate Irish people from British people. And sometimes Protestant Irish people are called Anglo-Irish or British. And even in the archives in England, Irish people are not properly categorized. So although it was true that countless Irish people suffered from English oppression for centuries, recently, internet media have circulated misleading claims, often using out-of-context sources to suggest the Irish people are enslaved, just like Africans. Even though there is some truth to this, the context is very, very different. Irish people are discriminated because they were Catholic. And so anyway, political interest, especially from far-right groups and individuals, have deliberately weaponized this myth to downplay the brutality of African slavery and oppose reparations or claim that all groups suffered equally, thereby undermining anti-racist movements. So these groups have used so-called pseudo-historical texts to spread the myth.
No, definitely, because my next question in regards to, I guess, how does the appropriation of the Irish slave narrative distort the history that not all Irish immigration to the Caribbean was in regards to being a slave?
Yeah, they were not. It distorts the broader history of Irish migration to the Caribbean. In reality, the Irish migration included all sorts of people, indentured servants, colonial administrators, and also voluntary settlers. So by framing all Irish laborers as slaves, the myth ignores distinctions of status and opportunity, because indentured servants later became overseers, landowners, and traders, and so on. And they participated in the slave economy, highlighting the shifting roles in colonial society.
No, definitely, because I mean, that's where I had found some of my ancestors as being
Okay.
not part of this, regular narrative of, the Irish were either enslaved or they were indentured type of narrative that definitely persists. So I was very surprised to see that as well.
Yeah.
So, and what would you say, I guess, were some of the, again, the broader consequences, both social, politically, and academic, of certain conflating this indentured servitude with slavery?
Yeah, it had serious consequences, I think. For a start, socially, it ignores the brutality of slavery, downplaying centuries of racial oppression and generational trauma. And politically, it is often used to undermine anti-racist movements and reject reparations and promote false equivalence between the historical experiences of white and Black communities. And academically, it distorts historical understanding and oversimplifies colonial labor systems and spread misinformation that hinders honest engagement with the past.
Absolutely. And how would you say your book, contributes to the current conversation about reparations or racial justice and historical accountability?
So I wanted a book that's easy to read. My book offers an evidence-based account of Irish experiences in the Caribbean, which helps debunk myth and clarify the historical record, I think. And by distinguishing indentured servitude from African slavery, the book challenges the misuse of Irish history in debates. And it also sheds light on the role they played within colonial systems. For example, most of them were the victims, but at the same time, they benefited from or participated in the structures of slavery. And they were also Irish abolitionist law and policymakers at the same time. So the book promotes a more inclusive understanding of colonial histories, which is essential for meaningful dialogue on post-colonial responsibility, I hope.
No, absolutely did, because I mean, it definitely showed more of the Caribbean. It didn't concentrate on just one particular island in and of itself. You
Mm,
definitely, it definitely showed more. It was across the Caribbean where Irish migration had occurred.
yeah,
Yeah. And I
okay.
guess for you, what kind of surprised you the most about your account of the Irish migration to the Caribbean?
Uh, Quite a few things, actually, but the most shocking thing was how they coped with the tropical climate, because many Africans who arrived there were sort of adapting to a more or less similar tropical climate and environment in Africa. But coming from a country which is so cold and wet is quite an adjustment. So not only the heat, but they were also not immune to tropical diseases. So many Irish people died early. So planters concluded they were not fit to work in plantations. They were sort of considered an unprofitable investment. So this is quite surprising thing. Yeah.
No, definitely. And then I guess, how can, I guess, educators and historians and, of course, the public responsibly engage with complex and uncomfortable history like these?
European indentured servants are well researched academically about local native Indians and Indians from India and Indonesians, Vietnamese, Jewish, and other Europeans in the Caribbean. But we ordinary people don't read or buy academic books.
Mhm.
So I wanted to do something about the myth because people are saying all sorts of things. That's why I wrote a book in the first place, so that the book's something easy to read. And unfortunately, the number of history students at universities around the world is decreasing. So on a community basis, educators and the public need to promote honest and inclusive storytelling that centers the voices of the voiceless. And this involves using accurate, well-researched sources and acknowledging the lasting impacts of slavery and creating safe spaces for dialogue and confronting discomfort rather than avoiding it. And I think it's important to connect past injustices to present day issues and to support community-led remembrance, kind of. So I think people are becoming more open to discussion. For example, former BBC journalist Laura Trevelyan and her family publicly apologized for their ancestral ownership of slaves on Grenada. And she's working on it full time now. And I think this is a very good case study we can work on.
No, definitely, because again, it gives more power to the story, to the narrative of not everything was just about just one particular aspect. There was
Yeah.
more to the story than what was just mostly known. And unfortunately, that major story or that major narrative gets being used all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I guess what would you say, what advice would you give to individuals, researching their family history who come across references to Irish slaves in their ancestry? How can they, verify and contextualize those claims responsibly?
The TV series called Who Do You Think You Are? People are discovering that many people have Irish roots. So, or if you trace a couple of generations back, we find all sorts of victims and unique characters, and we are all connected. But to verify and contextualize claims responsibly, we should consult reliable historical books. So understanding the social, political, and legal context of the time helps ensure a more accurate understanding of their ancestors' experiences.
No, definitely, because like as I said, I've come across this in my own family and just being able to get to other resources. Your book, there was many articles and other books that I, was able to reference and to use to kind of get a much better picture of what
Yeah.
exactly who and what they were and what they did on the island. And, the other question then is, how can families kind of reframe or recontextualize their ancestral stories in a way that honors the past, but does not contribute to historical inaccuracies or cultural appropriation?
I think by acknowledging the hardships their ancestors faced while also understanding the broader historical context and sharing stories with younger generations, this is, I think, crucial. And being honest about complexities and limitations and also centering empathy and humility. I think sharing stories this way honors the past and fosters respect for informed connections to history because we appreciate our lives because of our ancestors, no matter what. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. And I guess, what role can community historians or genealogists play in helping families understand the broader context of Irish migration to the Caribbean?
Historians can help by offering facts and highlighting the diverse roles Irish people played. Their work fosters more accurate, inclusive narratives and encourages deeper understanding of colonial history and its legacies. For example, in many places in the Caribbean, especially in Montserrat, St. Patrick's Day is a big celebration. So this can be Remembrance Day, especially for younger generations. They can learn a lot of things on that specific day.
No, absolutely. Because again, that is a big celebration on that island.
Yeah.
For that particular time, and people just may not understand why that would be that type of reference. So, but no, thank you. And then again, I just wanted to ask you, what were some of the resources that you used when, researching this book? Like, were there any specific archives that you went to be able to get the research?
Yes, I used a lot of academic sort of books and essays, and I've been to many local archives in Barbados, Jamaica, Montserrat. There is a small library in those smaller islands, but Jamaica, they got amazing, really good archives, and they got all sorts of information. Jamaica was quite impressive. So I used all the local archives in the Caribbean, and of course national archives in London, British Library in London as well. So yeah, I worked a lot at the archives.
Perfect. No, thank you so much for that. Because again, just kind of, I guess, providing where the sources would be for people to be able to look and to be able to, validate, most of their stories. Because as I said, I did use a lot of books to be able to validate the stories of what I then ended up coming across. And just finally, as we close, this discussion, what would you say, I guess, or provide as advice to anyone that is researching this time frame period, especially the Irish migration?
Yeah, it's important to look at the issue, whatever you are researching, as inclusive narratives, not just one aspect, because it's such a huge topic. I don't know what it depends what you're looking for, but like everything's connected, and Irish history is very, very complicated as well. British people don't study Irish history properly, and it's very, very, the books are not out there. There are a lot of academic books, but I think general books not really enough to study, but there are some books out there. So just keep searching and, and understand inclusive narratives. It is depressing, but there are a lot of amazing stuff out there as well.
No, there is a lot of information if you're willing to look and find it.
Yeah, Caribbean and Irish histories are not very, very well known to, a lot of ordinary people in Europe or other places. So yeah, there are a lot of, things to learn, so just keep researching and keep studying and learning, this can be like lifelong, study. Learning curve, just like I got really involved with Irish history, this is my lifelong passion now. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Never ending.
Exactly. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I just wanted to thank you, Professor Garcia, for coming on to the podcast and to be able to speak onto this, because this has been really, as I said, really central for myself in terms of what I've been able to find under the Irish in my family.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Hoped you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and write a review for the episode wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you.